They thought my age made me invisible. They thought my silence meant weakness. But they forgot. Sometimes silence is only the sound of patience waiting for its moment. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I am 72 years old. I say that without shame, without hesitation, and without apology. Age has lined my face and slowed my step, but it has also sharpened my memory and carved wisdom into my bones. I am a widow, a mother, and a grandmother, and I thought for a long time that my family knew who I was, what I had built, what I had survived. But life has a way of reminding you that even those closest to you can forget, or worse, choose to ignore the truth. It began on a night that was supposed to be a celebration, not of me, but of them, my daughter and her husband, a charity gala, they called it. Hundreds of guests gathered under glittering chandeliers, sipping champagne and murmuring to one another about business, money, and appearances. The hall was dressed in gold and ivory, with long banquet tables heavy with silverware, polished so brightly you could see your reflection in them. A string quartet played in the corner, their music weaving through the laughter and clinking glasses. I arrived quietly, as I always do. I wore a navy blue gown. Nothing extravagant, just dignified, with a string of pearls my late husband once clasped around my neck on our 50th anniversary. They are my armor now. I had hoped for a warm welcome, perhaps even a smile from my daughter Anna. Instead, I received a distracted kiss on the cheek, her eyes already darting toward her husband Daniel, who was holding court in the center of the room. Daniel, my son-in-law, ambitious, arrogant, and charming in the way a snake charmer is charming, only until you notice the fangs. From the moment Anna brought him into our lives, I saw the hunger in his eyes. He wanted more than love, more than family. He wanted status, wealth, the illusion of power, and he wanted people like me, quiet, older, and unwilling to compete with his vanity, to step aside and make room for his ascent. As I took my seat near the front, I noticed the way he looked at me, a smirk, almost dismissive, like I was a relic from a bygone era, a piece of furniture too heavy to move but too old to be of any use. I have lived long enough to recognize contempt when I see it. Dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation. Guests asked me the usual questions. How are your grandchildren? How are you keeping busy these days? Do you still live in the old house? Each question carried the same subtle message. You are winding down now, aren't you? You've had your time. I smiled and answered graciously, but inside I felt that familiar sting, the sting of invisibility. It wasn't always this way. There was a time not long ago when I was the one standing at podiums, speaking to crowded rooms, making decisions that shaped futures. But I had stepped back, not because I was forced to, but because I chose to. I thought I had earned rest, respect, perhaps even gratitude. Instead, I was beginning to see how easily respect can be stripped away when people believe your story has ended. The first crack in the evening came during the toasts before dinner. Daniel, glass in hand, raised it high, his voice carrying over the hall. He spoke of ambition, of legacy, of the future he and Anna were building, and then his eyes flicked to me, his lips curving into that same cruel smirk. Of course, he said, laughter bubbling in his tone. Some of us are a little, past our prime, but that's all right. We younger ones will carry the torch now. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Some chuckled awkwardly, others looked down at their plates, embarrassed. My daughter said nothing. She smiled politely, her hand resting on Daniel's arm as if to say, "Let it go." But I did not let it go. I felt each word land like a stone in my chest, past my prime, as though my worth had an expiration date stamped across it. I did not react outwardly. I have learned over the years that dignity often speaks louder than outrage, but inside something shifted, something quiet but powerful. Because humiliation is not just pain, it is fuel. And in that moment, I began to wonder if Daniel had forgotten exactly who I was and what I was still capable of. As the room returned to its chatter, my eyes drifted across the crowd. That is when I noticed him, sitting calmly, watching, the CEO of Daniel's company, a man I had not seen in years. He raised his glass toward me just slightly, his expression unreadable but respectful. I gave the smallest nod in return. And in that instant, I realized Daniel's mistake wasn't just mocking me. His mistake was mocking me in front of someone who knew the truth. The night wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. When you have lived as long as I have, you come to understand that betrayal never begins with one sharp blow. It begins in whispers, in little cuts, in moments so small they almost feel harmless, until they add up, until you look back and realize the pattern was always there. Daniel's remark at the gala was not new. It was simply the loudest version of a song he had been humming for years. I remember the first dinner Anna brought him to at my house. My late husband Richard had passed only a year before, and grief still clung to the walls of that home like dust you cannot sweep away. Daniel walked in with a confident stride, shook my hand too firmly, and glanced around as if evaluating the worth of every piece of furniture. Even then I saw it in his eyes, that hunger. At the table, he asked me what I had done before retiring. I told him I had worked for decades in finance, eventually leading investment strategy for one of the largest firms in the state. I thought perhaps he might respect that. Instead, he smirked. "Finance? That's cute," he said. "But the markets are different now. The old strategies don't apply anymore." My fork paused halfway to my lips. Anna laughed nervously and nudged him under the table, but he didn't notice. That was Daniel, always too busy hearing his own voice to notice the silence of others. From then on, he rarely missed an opportunity to chip away at me. At family gatherings, he'd mock the way I used a flip phone, as if modern gadgets defined intelligence. He'd laugh when I struggled with some new piece of technology, never offering help, only commentary. "Don't worry," he'd say loudly. "Once you're out of the picture, Anna and I will handle all this stuff." Out of the picture. The word stung, though I kept my expression neutral. What he never understood was that I had learned long ago that silence could be its own weapon. I watched, I listened, and I waited. But the cracks widened in ways I could not ignore. There was the day Anna visited me for coffee, her hands trembling around the mug. She confessed that Daniel had suggested they move into my house once I was gone, because maintaining it alone was a waste. Anna said it softly, almost apologetically, as if she were ashamed to even repeat it. My chest tightened, but I nodded, pretending not to mind. I didn't want her to feel trapped between us. Still, the seed was planted. Daniel did not see me as family. He saw me as an obstacle to an inheritance he hadn't yet earned. That seed sprouted the night of the gala. His jokes about me being past my prime were not careless slips of the tongue. They were part of the same pattern, a campaign to strip me of dignity so that, when the time came, no one would question why he had stepped over me. The first true confrontation happened not long after dinner when guests mingled around the ballroom. I had stepped aside to admire a portrait hanging on the wall when Daniel appeared at my shoulder, his champagne glass half empty. "You're enjoying yourself?" he asked, voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's a lovely evening," I replied, careful to keep my tone neutral. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Good, because you should. These events aren't really for your generation. It's time to let us run things. Before... Well," his eyes flicked toward my pearls, "before time runs out." The smile I gave him must have startled him because he blinked. "Daniel," I said quietly, "time runs out for all of us. The question is, what will you leave behind when it does?" He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and moved away. To him, it was just another small jab, another way to remind me that in his eyes, I was already halfway gone. But what he didn't see, what no one in that room saw, was the storm gathering inside me. As the night stretched on, I found myself reflecting on Richard, on the life we had built together brick by brick, investment by investment. We had not come from money. We had fought for every dollar, made sacrifices, and carved a future, not only for ourselves, but for our daughter. I had thought Anna would understand the value of that. Instead, she stood quietly at Daniel's side, letting his words settle into the air like poison. And that was what hurt the most. Not Daniel's cruelty, I had expected that, but Anna's silence, her unwillingness to defend me even with a glance. I smiled, I mingled, I let the music and laughter wash over me, but beneath the surface, the betrayal was blooming into something far larger. What Daniel saw that night was an old woman past her prime. What he didn't see was the history behind my silence, the investments I still held, the allies I had nurtured over decades, and the truth that was waiting for its moment. And when that moment came, I would not raise my voice. I would not lash out. I would simply let the truth speak for itself. Ugandine, there are moments in life you never forget. Moments that slice so deep they leave scars not on your body but on your soul. For me, that moment came under the glow of chandeliers in a room filled with 200 guests when my son-in-law decided that ridicule would make him shine brighter. Dinner plates had been cleared, the string quartet was playing softly, and the master of ceremonies announced that it was time for speeches. Daniel, of course, was first to seize the spotlight. He thrived on it, striding up to the microphone with his perfect tie and his too wide smile soaking in the applause before he had even spoken a word. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, raising his glass, "thank you for being here tonight. This evening isn't just about charity. It's about celebrating legacy and the future we're building together." A murmur of approval swept the hall. He'd always been skilled with words, skilled at making people believe he was polished, competent, untouchable. I sat near the front, my hands folded in my lap, my pearls resting heavy against my collarbone. He spoke of ambition, of youth, of innovation. His voice carried with a confidence that was almost hypnotic. I watched my daughter, standing nearby, gazing up at him as if he were the sun. My heart twisted. Not because she loved him, but because she seemed blind to what stood behind his words. Then, without warning, his tone shifted. His smile widened just slightly. His eyes landed on me. "And of course," he said, laughter bubbling at the edges of his voice, "we all know the importance of letting go of the past. Some of us," he gestured in my direction, his hand casual, dismissive, "are simply too old to matter in the work that lies ahead." For a heartbeat, silence. Then laughter rippled through the room. It wasn't thunderous. It was nervous, awkward, the kind of laughter that people give when they don't quite know whether they're supposed to laugh or not. But it was laughter all the same. I sat perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not let my eyes water. Inside, though, I felt the sharp sting of humiliation. It spread like fire beneath my skin, hot and merciless. I had been mocked before. I had been underestimated before, but never like this. Never in front of so many eyes, so deliberately. My daughter laughed too, just softly, her hand resting on Daniel's arm as if to steady him. That hurt more than the words. That was the knife twisting deeper. I could feel the weight of eyes on me, some filled with pity, others with discomfort. No one spoke in my defense. Not one voice cut through the laughter. And so I sat, shoulders straight, back tall, my hands unmoving in my lap. Dignity was the only shield I had left in that moment. Daniel continued, riding the wave of attention. He joked about youth, about energy, about how the world belonged to the new generation. Each word pressed harder, each phrase carefully crafted to remind me, and everyone else, that in his eyes, I was obsolete. But even as humiliation coursed through me, something else sparked beneath it. A memory, a truth, a reminder that Daniel, for all his arrogance, had no idea who I truly was, what I had built, and what I still carried quietly in my hands. It was then that my eyes found him, the man seated toward the back of the room, the CEO of Daniel's company. His posture was relaxed, his expression unreadable, but his gaze was sharp and steady. He was watching me, not Daniel, watching with the kind of respect that cannot be faked. And when his glass lifted slightly toward me, in the smallest of gestures, my humiliation softened into something else. Resolve. Because I realized that night, Daniel thought he had buried me beneath his mockery, but in reality, he had just lit the fuse of a truth that would consume him. I let the laughter roll over me. I let Daniel bask in his moment. I let the crowd believe I had been diminished. But inside, a plan was forming, not loud, not vengeful, but deliberate. The truth has a way of waiting, of biding its time, until the perfect moment arrives to speak. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that my moment was coming. The music swelled again as Daniel ended his speech to applause. He stepped down, chest puffed, arm around my daughter's waist. He believed he had won something that night. Respect, admiration, power. But he hadn't won. He had only shown his hand. And I was just beginning to show mine. The morning after the gala, I woke with the echoes of laughter still ringing in my ears. Sleep had been shallow, restless, broken by flashes of Daniel's smirk and the sound of Anna's soft laugh blending with the crowd's. But every time those memories threatened to crush me, I returned to one image, the CEO's glass lifting toward me, steady, deliberate, respectful. It wasn't much, just a gesture, but sometimes the smallest gestures are the heaviest anchors. I dressed in a simple suit that morning, the kind I used to wear to board meetings. The fabric was older now, softened with time, but slipping it over my shoulders reminded me of who I had been. No, who I still was. That afternoon, my phone rang. A number I hadn't seen in years appeared on the screen. For a moment, my hand hovered. When I answered, the voice on the other end carried me back decades. "Eleanor Hayes," he said warmly. "It's been far too long." It was Michael Turner, the CEO himself. Once a young man fresh out of graduate school, nervous, uncertain, sitting across from me in my office as I guided him through his first investment proposal. I had seen something in him then, intelligence tempered with humility. I'd taken him under my wing, and now, here he was, calling me with the weight of an empire behind his voice. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for what happened last night. It wasn't my place to interfere during the speech, but I could see how out of line it was." "You owe me no apology," I replied evenly. Daniel's words revealed more about him than they did about me. There was a pause. Then Michael said quietly, "I don't think he realizes who you are." "No," I murmured. "He doesn't." And that was the truth. Daniel knew me only as his wife's aging mother, the woman who sat quietly at the table and sometimes stumbled over technology. He had no idea that I still owned shares in the very company he worked for. He had no idea that those shares made me not just an investor, but a silent partner, one with more influence than he could dream of. I had chosen to keep that part of my life private after Richard died. Anna never asked, and I never offered. Perhaps I thought shielding them from the details of my work would protect them from the burdens that came with it. But now, I saw my silence had only fed Daniel's arrogance. Michael cleared his throat. "Eleanor, I don't mean to overstep, but I want you to know if you ever need the floor again, you have it. People in this industry haven't forgotten what you built. Neither have I." A warmth spread through me. Not the warmth of pride, but of vindication. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't obsolete. My legacy lived on, whether Daniel chose to see it or not. That night, I sat at my desk, pulling out files that had gathered dust, investment records, shareholder reports, correspondence with people who still addressed me as Miss Hayes rather than Anna's mother. The papers felt heavy in my hands, but their weight steadied me. For the first time in years, I felt the old spark ignite inside me, the spark of strategy. Daniel thought I was powerless. He thought he could erase me with a joke. What he didn't know was that every joke, every slight, every dismissal only sharpened the blade I now held quietly in my hand. I made a choice then. I would not confront him in anger. I would not trade insult for insult. Instead, I would let the truth reveal itself at the right moment, in the right place, where the weight of it could not be ignored. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, Anna invited me to another event, smaller, more intimate, a gathering of executives, investors, and their spouses. Daniel greeted me with a smirk, his confidence even more inflated after his performance at the gala. He leaned down and whispered, "Glad you came. Try not to fall asleep this time." I smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Daniel. I'm wide awake." The evening unfolded with the usual speeches and networking. But this time, when Michael took the microphone, he didn't begin with numbers or strategy. He began with a story. "Years ago," he said, "I was a young man with no direction, and there was a woman who believed in me when no one else did. She gave me guidance, discipline, and opportunity. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here tonight." My chest tightened as his eyes met mine. "That woman," he continued, "is in this room. Eleanor Hayes, not only my mentor, but one of the founding investors who believed in this company before it was even on the map." A hush fell. Heads turned. Daniel's smile faltered. Michael raised his glass toward me, his voice steady. "To Eleanor, to wisdom, to resilience, and to the foundation on which all of this was built." The applause that followed was louder than Daniel's had ever been. And for the first time in a long while, I did not feel invisible. I felt seen. Daniel's face told me everything, confusion, then shock, then the creeping edge of fear. He had spent years trying to paint me as irrelevant, but in a single moment, the truth had shattered his illusion. And I wasn't finished yet. If humiliation is a poison, then pride is the hand that forces you to drink it. Daniel could not swallow what had happened that night when Michael lifted his glass to me. I could see it in the way he avoided my eyes as applause echoed through the room, in the stiffness of his posture, as Anna clapped politely beside him. But poison has a way of resurfacing, and by the end of the evening, it spilled out of him. As guests lingered over dessert, Daniel approached me. His smile was tight, too controlled. "Quite the surprise," he said, lowering his voice. "You've been holding out on us." I placed my fork down gently. "Not holding out, Daniel. Just living my life." He leaned closer, his breath thick with wine. Mentor, investor, all that history. Impressive. But let's not pretend it changes the future. The company belongs to the next generation now. People like me. I met his gaze calmly. "And what exactly have you built, Daniel?" For a flicker of a second, something like anger cracked through his polished facade. Then he straightened. "I'm building a legacy with Anna, which is why," his voice dropped lower, "you should consider making things easier. Sign the house over now, your estate too. That way, there's no confusion later." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because of their audacity, I had long known his greed, but because of the cold certainty with which he delivered them. As if my life, my work, my sacrifices were nothing more than stepping stones to his comfort. "Is that what you think of me?" I asked softly. "A roadblock?" His smile thinned. "Don't take it personally. It's just practical. You've had your time. It's only fair that Anna and I take the reins now." I let silence stretch between us. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with clarity. For years, I had allowed his small insults to pass, hoping Anna would see him for what he was. But this was no longer about jokes or arrogance. This was theft in the making. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my tone even. His smirk returned, believing he had won something. But what I gave him was not surrender. It was rope, and I knew he would hang himself with it. The days that followed were uneasy. Anna called, her voice gentle, asking if I had considered helping them secure their future. I recognized her words for what they were, Daniel's echo. It pained me. My daughter, once fierce and independent, now spoke like a shadow of her husband. But pain has a purpose. It sharpened me. I dug deeper into my files, reviewing every detail of my holdings, my shares, my estate. Everything Richard and I had built was still under my control, no matter how invisible Daniel wanted me to feel. With each paper I touched, my resolve hardened. Meanwhile, Daniel grew bolder. At a family dinner the following week, he raised his glass again, this time with fewer guests, but with the same smugness. "Here's to Eleanor," he said. "May she enjoy her retirement while she still can." Anna laughed too quickly, nervously, her eyes darting to mine. I smiled politely, though inside fury simmered. Retirement? As if stepping back meant stepping down from life, as if everything I had accomplished was a relic, not a foundation. But humiliation is only temporary. Plans, however, plans are permanent. I arranged a quiet meeting with Michael at his office. He welcomed me with warmth, but also with the respect Daniel had never given me. We talked of old times, of strategies, of how the company had grown. When I explained Daniel's behavior, Michael's jaw tightened. "You don't deserve that," he said firmly. "I don't intend to accept it," I replied, "but I also don't intend to fight with noise. I prefer precision." He nodded slowly. "Then you'll have my support, whatever you need." Those words were not just comfort. They were power. And for the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. A week later, the charity circuit brought us all together again. Another ballroom, another microphone, another chance for Daniel to parade himself. He stood taller this time, his smile wider, as though he had already forgotten the sting of the last gathering. But I hadn't forgotten, and neither had Michael. When the speeches began, Daniel once again tried to position himself as the face of the future. But this time, whispers ran through the crowd. Whispers of my name, of my shares, of my history. His voice rang louder, but the respect in the room had already begun to tilt away from him. And he knew it. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his eyes flicked toward me. He was losing ground, and for a man like Daniel, nothing was more dangerous than that. I didn't need to say a word, not yet. Silence was still my sharpest blade. Because the louder he shouted, the clearer it became to everyone else. Daniel's empire was built on sand, and soon the tide would come. Pride makes a man reckless, and recklessness makes him careless. Daniel, stung by whispers he couldn't control, began scrambling harder to prove himself. He hosted meetings, charmed investors, and boasted about his future with the company. But no matter how wide he smiled, I could see the tension beneath his skin. He was a man losing his footing, clawing at a cliffside that was beginning to crumble. I remained silent, watching, waiting, because silence, I had learned, is not weakness, it is strategy. The opportunity came at the company's annual gala, a far grander affair than the charity event weeks earlier. Executives, board members, investors, and their families filled the ballroom, their laughter echoing beneath the vaulted ceilings. It was a night meant to display strength and unity, but for Daniel, it would be a night of reckoning. Anna and Daniel arrived arm in arm, Daniel in his tailored suit, Anna in a shimmering gown. She smiled, but I noticed the tightness in her eyes, the way her fingers clutched his sleeve. Even she could feel the cracks beginning to show. I took my seat near the front. My presence was not an accident. Michael had personally asked me to attend. "It's time," he had said, and I had agreed. The evening unfolded in the usual rhythm. Cocktails, small talk, the string of speeches that seemed to stretch forever. Daniel sat straighter each time his name was mentioned, as though waiting for his coronation. He believed this was his night. And then Michael took the stage. The room fell quiet. His voice carried with authority, but also with warmth, the kind of respect earned, not demanded. He began with the usual numbers, the company's growth, the challenges ahead. But then his tone shifted. "There is a story," he said, "that many of you don't know. This company, as strong as it stands today, was not built in isolation. It was built on the vision, the faith, and the courage of those who believed in it from the very beginning. I felt the air shift. A stillness settled over the room. "One of those people is here tonight," he continued. "A woman who not only guided me when I was young and unsure, but who invested her own resources when this company was nothing more than an idea. She believed when others doubted, and without her, none of us would be here." His eyes found mine. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in honoring Eleanor Hayes." For a moment, silence. Then applause erupted, louder than anything that had come before. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, turning toward me. My chest tightened, not from pride, but from something deeper, a reminder that legacy is not erased by age. It endures. Daniel's face told the story better than words ever could. His jaw slackened, his eyes darted wildly between Michael and me. Shock bled into disbelief, disbelief into anger, and finally into something worse, fear. Because in that moment, the power he thought he had stolen was stripped away. Not by me shouting, not by me fighting, but by the truth standing quietly in the light. Michael continued, his voice firm. "Eleanor is not only one of our founding investors, she remains one of our most respected shareholders. Her wisdom and integrity are part of the very foundation of this company, and it is my honor to recognize her tonight." The applause swelled again, filling the room like thunder. I rose slowly, acknowledging the crowd with a small nod. I did not need to speak. The truth spoke for me. My silence now was not weakness, it was strength. As I sat back down, I caught Daniel's eyes. He was pale, his smile brittle, his hands trembling against the stem of his glass. He had mocked me as too old to matter before 200 guests. Now, before an even larger audience, he had been shown the truth. I mattered more than he ever imagined. After the speeches, guests came to me with handshakes, gratitude, respect. Words like honor, legacy, indispensable floated around me. Daniel lingered at the edges, forced to watch as the spotlight shifted permanently away from him. Later, when the crowd thinned and the music softened, he approached me. His voice was low, tight, strained. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why keep it a secret?" I looked at him calmly. "Because I don't need to announce my worth, Daniel. It stands on its own." His fists clenched, though he forced a smile. "You made me look like a fool." "No," I corrected softly. "You did that yourself." And for the first time, he had no reply. The night of the gala ended with Daniel silent, his confidence stripped away but humiliation alone doesn't change a man like him. Pride is stubborn, and greed even more so. He would come to me, not to apologize, but to salvage what he thought he was losing. And I was right. 2 days later, he appeared at my house. No phone call, no warning, just the crunch of his tires in my driveway, the slam of his car door, the hurried knock at my door. When I opened it, he stood there in his pressed suit, his smile too wide, his eyes too sharp. "Eleanor," he said, his voice overly sweet, "may I come in?" I stepped aside, gesturing toward the sitting room. He entered quickly, pacing as though the walls were closing in on him. Finally, he turned to me. "Look," he began, "I may have underestimated you, but we're family. Surely you can see how important it is for Anna and me to secure our future. We need your support, financially, strategically, whatever way you can help us. We're on the same team, right?" I studied him carefully. Gone was the smug certainty, replaced by a thin desperation. He wasn't here out of love or respect. He was here because he had realized how fragile his position really was. "Daniel," I said evenly, "tell me something. When you stood in front of those guests and called me too old to matter, did you believe those words?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It was a joke. You know how these things are, lighthearted and good fun. Do I look like I found it fun?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I leaned forward slightly. Here's the truth. You've spent years underestimating me. You've treated me as though my age erased my worth, as though my silence was emptiness instead of restraint. But you've mistaken dignity for weakness. That ends now. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. So what? What do you want from me? I let the question hang in the air. For once, he was the one waiting, the one uneasy in the silence. Finally, I said, respect. Nothing more, nothing less. You will not mock me in public or in private. You will not pressure me for my estate, my house, or anything else that belongs to me. If you do, I will not hesitate to use my influence at the company to ensure your career ends before it begins. Do you understand me? His jaw tightened. You'd really do that? I met his gaze, unblinking. I don't make empty threats. He stood frozen, caught between anger and fear, and in that silence, I saw the truth settle into him. He had no power here, not anymore. I'm only trying to take care of Anna, he muttered finally, his voice weak. Then take care of her, I replied sharply. Be her husband, not her parasite, because if you continue down this path, the only thing you'll take care of is your own downfall. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a stiff nod, he turned and left. The slam of the door echoed through the house, but it didn't shake me. I felt steady, stronger than I had in years. The weeks that followed brought a shift. Daniel became quieter at gatherings, his arrogance tempered, though never gone completely. Anna began to look at me differently too, less as a relic, more as someone she hadn't fully understood. She asked questions about my past, about the company, about the work Richard and I had done. And slowly I saw recognition dawn in her eyes. I didn't share everything. Some truths are better discovered than handed over. But I gave her enough to know that her mother was not someone to be pitied, but someone to be respected. And Daniel? He stayed in line, out of fear perhaps, or out of a grudging realization that he could no longer play his game unchecked. Either way, it didn't matter. The balance had shifted. My dignity was restored. My legacy was protected. One evening, weeks later, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought back to the night of the gala, the laughter, the sting, the humiliation, and then the turn. The glass raised in my honor, the truth revealed. I smiled softly to myself. They had thought my age made me invisible, but invisibility, I had learned, is not the same as absence. Sometimes it is simply the quiet before the reveal. And when the reveal comes, it does not whisper, it roars. After Daniel left my house that day, a strange quiet settled around me. Not the silence of loneliness. No, I have known that kind of silence before, and it bites at the edges of your heart. This was different. This was the silence of peace, of resolution. For years, I had carried the weight of his arrogance, his small cruelties, his need to diminish me to make himself feel larger. I had endured it in silence, thinking that was the dignified choice. But what I realized was this. Silence only has power when it is chosen, not when it is forced upon you. That night at the gala, when Daniel mocked me before 200 guests, he thought he was reducing me to nothing. Instead, he revealed everything about himself. And I revealed who I had always been. Life did not change overnight, of course. Daniel remained in Anna's life. Marriage is a knot not easily untied, but something shifted between us. He no longer looked at me with smirks or dismissive laughter. When he greeted me at dinners, his voice carried restraint, even respect, though begrudging. He had learned finally that the woman he tried to erase was not a relic, but a cornerstone. Anna, too, began to change. At first, she was quiet, processing the truth she had learned about me, my past, my work, the role I had played in building the very company her husband worked for. One evening, she came to me with tears in her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you sooner. I didn't know." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You couldn't have known everything, Anna, but now you do. And now you must decide what kind of woman you want to be. One who stands silently beside a man who diminishes others, or one who stands on her own feet, strong and unshakable." She nodded, her lips pressed tight, and I saw something in her then, a flicker of the strength she once carried before Daniel dulled it. In the months that followed, the company continued to thrive. My shares held steady, my influence quietly intact. Michael often reached out for my thoughts on major decisions, his respect never waning. And though I had no desire to return to boardrooms or endless meetings, it comforted me to know that my voice still carried weight where it mattered. Daniel, meanwhile, walked more carefully. Word of his outburst at the gala had spread among colleagues, whispered behind closed doors. His name no longer shone as brightly in conversations. Some looked at him with amusement, others with suspicion. He had mocked the wrong person, and in doing so, revealed his true colors to those who once believed his charm. It wasn't revenge I savored. It was justice. Quiet, steady justice. Because revenge fades quickly, leaving only emptiness. But justice restores balance, and balance is what I had craved all along. I still sit on my porch in the evenings, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in amber and rose. Sometimes I hear the laughter of children on the street. Sometimes I hear the soft rustle of wind through the trees. In those moments, I think of Richard, of the life we built, the risks we took, the sacrifices we made. He would have been proud to know that what we created still stood strong, unshaken by the arrogance of men like Daniel. I think of my grandchildren, too. One day they will grow old enough to understand, and when they do, I want them to know that age is not the ending of power, but its refinement, that wisdom is not something to laugh at, but something to stand upon. They will hear stories, perhaps even whispers of the night their father mocked me, but I hope what they remember most is what happened after, that their grandmother stood tall, not with shouting or anger, but with truth. The memory of that first toast at the gala still lingers, the sting of his words, the ripple of laughter. For a time it threatened to break me, but now, when I think back, I do not feel pain, I feel clarity. Because that night did not mark my erasure, it marked my reveal. They thought my age made me invisible. They thought my silence meant weakness. But what they forgot, what Daniel learned in the most humiliating way possible, was that I was never gone. I was always there, watching, waiting, building. And when the time came, I did not need to raise my voice. I only needed to let the truth rise.